Hello, everyone, and welcome to Blogging Theology. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Rehan Khan and Peter Gould. You're most welcome, gentlemen. Salam alaikum.
Walaikum
Walaikum
assalam.
salam. Great to be with you.
Good to see you. And you're both in Sydney, Australia at the moment?
We are, yes. I'm just visiting Peter. We had a book launch here. I'm normally based in Dubai, but in sunny Sydney right now.
Yeah, it's been wonderful to have
I'm very envious because I'm in miserable London, where as normal it's pretty overcast and rainy. But enough about London. We're here today to introduce and explore the Tales of Kayal with Rehan and Peter. Tales of Kayal, this is the book cover, by the way, more about that in a sec, is a groundbreaking work of science fiction that's a mixture of Dune, Star Wars, and Lord of the Rings, all in one. It has many Islamic themes, which is why I'm particularly interested in it. Set in a fictional world that resembles the colonial period, it explores what it means to be human in a time of massive technological and society change. Now, the book came out on the 26th of September, just recently. And I say this is the book we're going to be talking about and looking at a video in a minute. And it's got a lot of buzz, this book, and is truly a pioneering effort in the field of Islamicized fiction in a world that desperately needs great storytelling. As a keener observer of history and technoscience, Rehan has always been intrigued how ideas and inventions move from one civilization to the next and how they change as they shift across different cultures. He's the author of a number of works, including Tomb of Empires, 2024, a historical fiction set in 90 BC in the Middle East. And he's the author of the Carnegie-nominated A Tudor Turk trilogy, set in the Ottoman Empire and Tudor England, and also the fantasy sci-fi series, The Tales of Kayal, we're going to look at today. That's set on the Earth-like planet of Iqlil, if I pronounce that correctly. These gripping stories also ask readers to consider the role of virtue within the human story. Now, Peter Gould is an internationally acclaimed designer, entrepreneur, and pioneer of heart-centered design leadership. This is one of his books, by the way, beautifully designed work there. With over 2 decades of experience shaping the future of design, he advises global innovators and emerging leaders on creating with authenticity, vision, and purpose. So, gentlemen, before we go any further, we're going to look at your video on YouTube, just a couple of minutes long, just by way of introducing us to this extraordinary new book that you have just had published. So let me just get it up on the screen. Full screen. Here we go.
Tales of Kayal is a set of stories that look to really address the question that what does it mean to be human in a time of tremendous techno-scientific change?
The vision for Tales of Kayal is a creative fictional universe inspired by spiritual imagination, which is seeing and imagining with your heart. It's a different kind of faculty.
So how does the heart actually manifest certain spiritual realities? So to explore that whole question, we've created this fictional world called Iqlil. And we join the story in the third epoch of this planet. It's the final epoch. So the story begins with this arrival of this comet, which signifies the end time, the coming of something called the final standing, the return of an old enemy of humanity called Mortan. Now we see these cataclysmic events unfolding through the eyes of 2 main protagonists, Zorar and Alifa. What we've tried to do, we've tried to explore the story through putting pressure on certain characters, because when you put pressure on characters in a fictional tale, you kind of find out who they are. And that really allows us to explore this notion of spiritual imagination.
There's a lot of parallels, of course, in the Islamic tradition, but we set it in a fictional universe. It's a fictional sandbox. We didn't want to encounter any aqid issues or issues of commenting on specific peoples or places or histories. But Muslim readers will very much find those present and be able to identify many layers of what is it like to be Muslim in this age.
In the modern world today, a lot of people feel very disconnected from tradition, from what really went before. And each generation lives in the memory that there was something before them, but sometimes they're not quite sure what that is. And as the generations pass through, that tradition becomes like a shadow, and eventually it just disappears entirely. And so what literature does, literature provides a unique sort of platform to discuss this. It really addresses the trials and tribulations of what it means to be human across time. In our tradition, we have a real richness to create stories that are very different.
I really long to see this more beautiful presence and representation of Islamic concepts and Muslim heritage and beautiful art, more authentically representing the spiritual concepts, virtues, and stories from our tradition. So the first wave or the first generation of Tales of Khayal content was a series of short stories and comics. They were beautiful and well received, but for the vision to be fully realized, I knew that we needed an experienced and very dedicated storyteller who understood the vision and understood the opportunity to create what I think millions of readers would be interested in reading and watching. And that came in the form of Rihan Khan.
This novel is a process of art, but it's a process of craft as well. And so I've been doing a lot of the craft of the novel, and Peter has been doing a lot of the art of the novel. But together, that's really worked. So a lot of the great ideas in the story that people will see, some of the technology that they'll come across, are things that we've sort of come up together whilst working, having a cup of garak chai in my house in Dubai.
We would spend a lot of time in what we call the Majlis al-Khayal. It was basically his living room, or he came here out to Sydney.
With papers and tasbees and all kinds of things all over the place.
We would spend hours and hours talking about histories and worlds and technologies of the characters.
It's the first time I've worked with someone on a creative process in this manner.
I couldn't ask for a more amazing guy to collaborate with, alhamdulillah.
It's really pushed me much further than I would have gone had I done it by myself.
The vision is to build a community of people who really engage and love with this world. They cherish the maturity and sophistication of the stories in it, the nuances of the characters, the influences in the world.
We're really trying to get that whole alternative ecosystem set up so that we and other artists can start coming together and have this bigger platform to create stories that will appeal not just to people of faith, but people who are concerned with anything to do with right and wrong as well.
I think the world really is lacking that kind of more heart-centered creative content, heart-centered stories, video games, TV. This is what I would like Tales of Khayal to become, inshallah.
Very nice. Very nice video, Ed.
Thanks. MashaAllah. Great to see it.
Good. So, tell us more about the Tales of Khayal.
Yeah, well, Bismillah. First of all, wonderful to be on your channel that we both appreciate and we benefit a lot from, and your audience. Assalamu alaikum. It's really a blessing to share. I think Rihan and I both focused a lot on our intention with this journey together, and consciously really thinking about, after we both had 20 plus years professionally, and it had been over 20 years since I embraced Islam when I met Rihan, and we really thought, how are we spending our time? We were reflecting on the world around us, the things we're seeing with our children, families, and communities, and how can we create something meaningful that, inshallah, if God wills, uses that creative experience we have, the different insights we've had into creating different products or brands, or in Rehan's case, writing wonderful novels, beautiful stories that are very layered. And how can we come together with a clear intention to seek God and invite people to seek God, but people from all backgrounds and walks of life? Rehan, maybe you can share a bit more about that journey.
Yeah, so I think one of the things there, Paul, was that, as Peter said, intention. And, every great fantasy sci-fi story has what they call lore, right? Lore, the lore of the story. Who are the people? What do they believe? What's happening? How do we get to this point in the world, and so on? So when we started the lore document, what we did, we actually put the intention there, and we said our intention is to get closer and draw closer to God through the art that we're creating. And in so doing, maybe the people who read it, who experience it, perhaps they might also think about God as part of that. And this is very much in the tradition of great writers. If you think about Tolstoy, and yes, he led a very bohemian life, but as the great Russian novelist, as you know, towards the end of his life, he became quite pious. He became very religious. And the very last book he writes is called What is Art? And in that, he questions the intention of the artists of his time in the 19th century, and says, these guys, all they're interested in is showing off and getting rich and becoming famous, whereas really the intention should be around remembering God, right?
This episode of yours on intention is very Islamic. I mean, I remember when I embraced Islam, I remember a Muslim saying to me, "Look at this hadith in Bukhari," and this was like the first Bukhari hadith. Actions are judged by intentions. This is a saying of the Prophet Muhammad, upon him be peace. So it's not just merely doing the right thing; it's having the right attitude, the right intention by which we'll be judged. And this is a foundational, Islamic principle, that our actions are judged by intention. So it's fascinating that you highlight that right at the beginning.
Yeah, and I think we both said at the beginning, whether we end up selling 5 books or 5 million books, the outcome is not in our hands, but the means, and having ihsan, excellence, and having justice, adl, in the means, we have that, we can do that. And where God takes us on that journey, that's not up to us, right? So we started with that very clear intention, and everything I think went from there, really.
Yeah, alhamdulillah. And we both spent a lot of time envisioning this world and trying to bake in our intentionality into how we work together, and how the characters in this story, in this world, might also be going through their spiritual journey and discovering and learning over this series of books. And for example, that meant spending a lot of time blending different influences that we both had in our lives over the previous couple of decades or more, thinking about the populations, the worlds, and different heritage that we've appreciated, and different conflicts that we wanted to address in a creative way, in an allegorical sort of way. So
I noticed that previous slide, but just go back to the one you just. This reminds me very much of Middle Earth and Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, the mountains and so on, and Middle Earth, Middle Sea. So there's clearly a slight influence there from Tolkien, perhaps.
I think that you're absolutely right. You're on the right line there, Paul. In terms of the influence, is more from the Silmarillion, which is obviously the creation story of the planet Arda. And as you know, the Lord of the Rings is just the addendum, right? So when Tolkien takes the book, his magnus opus, to his publishers and gives them the whole thing, they say, well, this stuff is too long, but we'll publish these smaller books at the end of Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. And of course, he fights for 3 years to say, I want the whole thing published. And they don't do it until after he dies anyway. So we actually drew very much on the Silmarillion and that creation story, because in the planet, in the first epoch, this story is set in the third epoch, or the third age. But we actually say in the first epoch, the creator there was a descent that took place, and 3 beings came down onto the planet. Of course, this is what they believe in the story. So it's entirely fictionalized. This is what they believe. And that was what all went into the lore, really. So it was very much looking at the Tolkien style of writing, which is very Christian and is very wholesome, but it's not overtly Christian. Like C.S. Lewis is overtly Christian. It's like the story of Christ and through his sacrifice, Aslan and so on. Whereas Tolkien didn't take that approach. He actually said, no, I'm going to use completely different language. So we took the Tolkien approach. We didn't take the C.S. Lewis approach.
I like that.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I've really appreciated the last couple of years or more, working with Rihan, is the world building process and the thinking about the lore, not in this just sort of fantastical, imaginative way, but drawing from the richness of what is khayal. It was 10 years into my journey being Muslim that I first really encountered with the teacher, the deeper meaning of khayal, which in Arabic I had thought is just sort of imagination, or if you're in Indonesia, khayal means daydreaming, or parts of Pakistan in Urdu it might be a thought or even poetry. But with one of my teachers who had deeply studied this tradition, this faculty of spiritual imagination, the imaginal realm rather than the fantastical imaginary realm. And I hadn't, as someone who's on the creative professional, helping design and develop projects and brands professionally and different kind of works, I hadn't really discovered this, and I think that took me on a journey of how can we really explore that further in the world. And I also grew up playing video games and spending many hours exploring different types of open worlds, whereas Rihan probably spent more time reading the classics. So together we sort of brought this blend of influences, I think.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and the world maybe go back. Yeah. So I think Paul, if you look at the map of the world, we kind of set this. Obviously, it's on a different planet, but in terms of Earth timeline, maybe it's sort of like 19th century, but it has a different technological track. So there is tech, not like there was tech in our world in the 19th century. And really, one of the setups within the story is really how a corporation in the story, it's called the Syndicate, how the Syndicate takes over an empire, and for that, and the empire they're taking over is in the middle of this map, which is called Eron. And I think when I was researching that, William Dalrymple's book, The Anarchy, about how the East India Trading Company, like a vampire squid, sucks Mughal India dry, was very helpful, because it shows you how financially the company took over, India once it secured the collection of the taxation, how it changed the education system, how the traditional, madrasa systems were destroyed, how the awqaf and the waqf system was disbanded. Yeah. Really, how you take away all those traditional centers of learning, commerce, how guilds and other things function, and you replace it with an industrialized, mechanized kind of system. So really, that's kind of one of the elements within the story about the loss of sacred knowledge, and it's also a very subtle reflection on colonialism. And of course, what colonialism led to was the rise of global corporations. Yeah. And of course, what the impact of global corporations was the destruction of the environment, right? So there are many things like that which are connected. So I was reading a lot of books on environmental history whilst preparing for this, just to understand that. So I think we've tried to be as well researched and as genuine in our world building. But of course, I'm sure there are things that we've missed out, and mistakes we've made and stuff like that.
Very interesting. I'm interested you mentioned, we've spoken of Tolkien before. In Lord of the Rings, it's a completely alternative universe, a sub-creation, where Christianity is never mentioned, Jesus is never mentioned, even God is never mentioned. And yet, I remember reading it, first of all, the first time I read Lord of the Rings as a Christian, it is suffused with Christian themes. The understanding of evil, for example, is very Augustinian. So evil is a deprivation of good rather than a positive force in itself. It's not intrinsic. There's no intrinsic evil. It's simply the absence of good, a choice to move away from the light, so to speak. So it's infused with these, and if you know the Catholic tradition, you can detect these kind of these influences and these themes just operating just out of sight of Mordor and out of sight of Frodo and whatever. But in your novel, in what way is there an Islamic influence? I take it there's no explicit mention, say, of Islam as such. Would that be right? No.
Yeah, no, there isn't. I mean, even in the Lord of the Rings, you're right, there's not. There's only a reference to the Valar, right? In
Yeah.
Lord of the Rings, they refer to the Valar. But in the Silmarillion, they explain that the Valar were the Ainur. They were like the angels created by Ilúvatar. And of course, in Silmarillion, he talks about the creator, Ilúvatar, who creates the Ainur. One of the Ainur is Melkor, who then later becomes Morgoth, obviously in the Lord of the Rings. So if you've read, that's why he wanted to publish those other books first, because so people could understand his creation story in the Silmarillion, and then later on in the Lord of the Rings, it's a bit more further afield. And anyway, this is not about Tolkien, but we could go into.
But we're looking to.
What is the Islamic influence? How would you characterize Islamic influence in Tales of Chaos?
So what we've done is that we've, if you think about it, within this world, which we call Khayal, one of the ways that people access certain abilities, because any science fiction or fantasy novel has a magic system quite often, right? You know, there's a magic system, how do I access powers and so on. Now, we call that, in our system, we call that Kha. And it's not a magic system, but it's a spiritual system, right? And in the story, they believe that this Kha emanates from the ocean that surrounds the divine ocean that surrounds the throne of the creator. So we reference the creator. And so to access the Kha, you have to have certain, you have to access it through your heart, right? So when you polish your heart, then you can access these powers. It's not like I have a book of spells and I have a wand, or I eat something to access the powers. I actually access the powers through my heart, right? So there, you think, oh, so we're talking about metaphysics, we're talking about, Islamic, metaphysics in that area. Yeah, and yes, we are, but we're not calling it out like that. Okay, and of course, then there are two ways when you access this energy. You can use it in what we call a Nurani way, which you could translate as light, or you could use it in a Dhulmi way, which you could translate as oppression, darkness, and so on. And so those who are essentially using the power in a Nurani way, what they're doing, they're undertaking an act of like subcreation. They're undertaking an act of stewardship, of nurturing. So they're using the divine energy, divine power for stewardship. Whereas those who are using it for Zulmi aspirations, they're using it for domination, right? And so in that way, again, anyone with some kind of understanding of Islamic tradition or any faith-based tradition will say, oh, okay, I get that. I understand that. Yeah, there's this kind of creation story. That's how we've done it, Paul. We haven't been explicit. But anyone's any faith tradition, whether it's Confucianist or Taoist or Abrahamic, then they'll get it. They'll like, yeah, I get this.
Yeah. Cool. Very, very good.
And I think these elements here are, I don't know if you wanted to touch on that last bit. Yeah. So, well, in short, and we love people to, we don't want to have too many spoilers in the book either. If people are, going to read it, or there's audiobooks available as well, which people, humbly are enjoying. But we also want to create this, it's ultimately a fiction, but it's going to be, a very creative, rich world where there are, different abilities, and people have, there's different things they must nurture throughout their life and kind of become unveiled. So you might have a karma, there's certain elements they have that exist in the world that help them kind of activate that from their tasbih, for example, or their beads, or they might have a litany that improves the resonance of these beads they carry. But then you also have someone on the Dhulmi path. So someone on the Nurani order or the Dhulmi path, for example, they'll become more of an agitator. So they'll use the same eletate to agitate. So there's a scene I really like, without spoiling it, where there's this sort of big gathering of among dignitaries and nobles, and the room is, there's some hidden conduits. So people who have these abilities are conduits, and someone with rare individuals are as a grand conduit who have access to all of them. So someone's agitating, someone's calming. So there's, without giving away, we'll let people discover that. But we wanted to have a world where there's more to discover, and you're being pulled in, and it's a series over more than 5 books to invite us into a lot of variables that I think people enjoy.
And I think here, Paul, often in especially in Western kind of action movies and stuff, often the battles are fought, people slugging it out, right? punching it out, and so on. Whereas if you look at the Chinese literary tradition, in a lot of Chinese novels, especially like, for example, some of the more modern ones like Jin Yong. Jin Yong is probably he's like the Tolkien of the Chinese world. So if you read his books, then these kind of martial arts masters, when they're fighting it out, sometimes they fight it out, and sometimes what they do is they play music at each other. So one fights with a flute, and the other has some kind of guitar, and their harmonics, they're fighting each other through the harmonics. And when they realize that they're about equal, then they won't sort of fight. And if one realizes the other is more powerful, he'll basically submit. So what I was leaning into was actually this tradition within Chinese fiction, especially the wushu kung fu tradition, where actually they masters fight with music. And I was thinking actually it would be quite good to have emotional abilities that you actually fight with as well. So again, we've drawn from the from the Chinese tradition there.
Yeah, and we have this great ultimately still got to be a great adventure. It's got to be a page turner at that plot level. So you'll have a clarifier who's sort of bringing reminders, or through their poetry or art or some sort of form, they're trying to make people feel some more cohesiveness with their universe of what's around them, or a distractor. You have a nourisher who's more healing or decayer. So. And you have a revealer who can imbue certain artifacts, like for example, an astrolabe across time. So we tried to bring in a lot of Islamic references, but not in a way that will be inaccessible. For example, my 11-year-old can read it and get a great adventure story out of it, and be critical where it needs to be of the plot elements. But we've had people, much older than us, really enjoy the depth and layers of it we've tried to build in there.
Wow.
I'll maybe just go through a couple of these little succession. So we also want to bring a rich visual language and set of environmental storytelling through what I call the design journey. So of course we're talking about a book at the moment. That's the first thing that we've launched, but we really want to approach this as a world, as a creative fictional universe for people to discover and enjoy, that will inshallah be more than books in future as well. And so that meant thinking about, the design of, even, for example, the look and feel, the identity. So we work with the traditional calligrapher, Salwar, amazing calligrapher, to help us develop a unique identity that we wanted the authentic khayal in Arabic in there, but we also wanted to make sure that works well in the overall identity. Anyone can read it. So we, for example, what we wanted to avoid was the very kind of Arabian Nights, Aladdin, 1001, Disney sort of, cliches and tropes. But we did want to have some references, everything from the coffee to some of the language to the way souks are described, to certain mannerisms, certain characters. There are loads and loads of things that Muslim readers will, I think, find delight in, but anyone can appreciate, inshallah.
Right.
And so these are just some of the images that we helped create.
These images are very beautiful, I must say. We saw some of them in the video and in the book. By the way, there'll be links to all this in the description below. In the book itself, that is lavishly illustrated. You can't really see here with precisely these kinds of art that you furnish. So and there's lots and lots of the art in the book.
Yeah, and one thing we're very conscious of is that this is not a graphic novel. This is not a comic where we're showing the faces and action poses, for example. Inshallah, that will come next year. We're working on that, inshallah. But we, in a great fiction, especially given that we're talking about khayal, we don't want to deprive people of creating that, having their own imaginative experience. Yeah. So you won't find really faces, but we wanted to create some environmental cues, and also we're in a world where to get someone to spend the time looking at a novel is sometimes a bit of a hard sell for a lot of people, but having the right imagery, alhamdulillah, it's invited people to be curious about the world, I think.
And I think there, Paul, in terms of the imagery, if you look back to some of the novels from the 19th century, whether it's Jane Austen or Dostoevsky or Dickens, there was a tradition of illustration, right?
Yes.
If you're reading Hard Times by Charles Dickens, you would get to see what Mr. Gradgrind looks like, and Mr. Bounderby looks like, and they'd actually show you. So I think when I said to Peter, these books from the 19th century had illustrations in them, yes. Right? Yeah. And then we had, like, in the modern period, you had the Roald Dahl and the Quentin Blake kind of story and illustration as well. So we were like, well, why don't we do it as well? Like, I think because I would love looking at those pictures. I'd look at them for hours. Oh, this is what these characters look like.
Definitely. As a child, I remember taking my father's copies of Lord of the Rings off the shelf, not realizing these are very, very old, second edition, pulling out the maps and looking at the characters and throwing it in my school bag and reading about Frodo and the ring and the beautiful illustrations that Tolkien himself often drew. And so I think we're trying to rejuvenate that, but we also don't want to be so prescriptive for people. Let them have that journey. We did create. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, please.
No, I was just saying the audiobook. Yes, of course, we must speak about that, please.
Yeah, so I think we're in a world where, again, like there's definitely, probably many people listen to this beautiful podcast are active readers and they enjoy reading and they, look and always have a long active reading list, I'm sure. But I also know, anecdotally through many professionals and people of different ages, audiobooks are so important. So we created an audiobook and then also an audiobook with a soundtrack. We partnered with Chapters, which is a fantastic Muslim startup which focus on Muslim-centric audiobooks to help us share. So we made an exclusive kind of version for them, which we made available free for 3 months. So we just launched it last week, and we had our first 1,000 listeners finish, I think, yesterday, which has been great. We've been having wonderful feedback, and we really wanted to we work with great audio actors. We work with a great composer as well to help develop a soundtrack around it. Just to, we have to design, if you like, a product for today, which is a great story, a great novel, well illustrated, inshallah, great, but also audiobooks and ebooks. We need to kind of be available where people are to reach.
Yeah, and I think with the audiobook, we were very blessed to have, someone very well, Paul, which is David Williamson, who did the voices for, very, very talented young man, and him and Laiba Hussein, another very talented voice.
Because there's dozens of characters, and between them, it's very compelling. I think they did a wonderful job of bringing that to life with, between them.
Yeah, so on Chapters it's like without soundtrack, and with the soundtrack is on Audible. On
the right there, it says explore Yasser Qadhi's top picks.
Yeah, I think that was a screenshot from Chapters. If you go now, there was without I guess getting too excited about it. I believe we were the top downloaded in the last week, so we hit some charts somewhere. But look, alhamdulillah, we speaking of scholars, like we've definitely wanted to work closely with scholars, advisors, teachers from the very beginning, just to make sure. You've got to be very mindful. We're not accidentally, creating any confusion. And that was a very early conscious decision. As a creative fictional universe, we don't use specific references to, for example, certain scholars. But alhamdulillah, at the very beginning of the journey, we did Umrah together. And when we were in Medina, alhamdulillah, we were referring and reflecting on the hikam of Ibn Ata'illah. And for example, in aphorisms there, you'll see reflected in the start of many chapters. There's a book that the Nuranis reference called The Wisdom of the Way. And they basically paraphrased aphorisms from that source. So we've tried to do things like that without being preachy, but inviting people into that wisdom that, alhamdulillah, we've benefited from ourselves.
Yeah, and I think that whole, what Peter refers to as the aphorisms. Aphorisms was a very popular genre within the Muslim world, where you'd have like short, pithy statement, which said a lot, right? And so every chapter, if you pick up any chapter in the book there, Paul, and open the chapter to the beginning, you'll see there's an aphorism. There's something, and what that aphorism is meant to do is meant to summarize what's about to come in that chapter. So, feel free.
Yeah, there's an aphorism there. A human lacking humanity is nothing better than a beast. That's from the Book of Heralds. Yeah, it's very relevant and contemporary, that thought.
We also have, Paul, you'll be happy to know. Of course, we're going to keep the book a little lighthearted as a counterpoint. So we also put in the book Fool's Paradise. So, for example, you'll find, I remember kind of throwing this off in one of our chai sessions, and it was, whoever says money can't buy happiness doesn't have enough money. Like, we've got this Dunyawi counterpart as well in the story.
Another one, chapter 10. Oh, what wonder and delight there is to start a fight.
That's from A Fool's Paradise. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So there are just different aphorisms there, and what we were trying to do is just that tradition, but within the Muslim world, that people would write volumes from short statements, really, before.
Yeah. The last couple of slides here, we've just been sharing things that happened in the last week, and alhamdulillah, really good response. We particularly wanted to make sure it's relevant for a range of age groups and backgrounds, and alhamdulillah, we're trying to really think of it as people, a community that appreciate the concept that there's a certain representation that's been lacking for a long time in, I think, quality sci-fi and fantasy fiction, but also in video games, in film and TV. So Rihan and I really tried to, how do we authentically draw from our stories, traditions, but bring something that addresses the issues of the day, issues of loneliness, the issues of digital addiction. So, for example, we have this device in the first book called a scroll light. And a scroll light, you can imagine as a scroll you open, people write on it with a kamish, and it's a liquid algae display. So the world of the fuel in this world, the resources are algae. Maybe we can talk about it in a moment. But one thing I like about that, as one of the characters is coming to use their scroll light with the scroll master, how do we use this? Think of it as very, very early internet. So it's just peer-to-peer, slow. And she asked this innocent question, which is basically something along the lines of, oh, can I send a message to many people at once? And then the scroll master's like, well, no, that will distract a lot of people. Why would, just send it to the people you want to? And basically we're commenting on WhatsApp groups and modern day social media where you blast and distract lots of people at once. So there's little moments like that I think that made me laugh when I first read the draft of that one.
And I can see that it's number one there on the right on the screen there. That number one in the most listened to lists of. So it's amazing.
Alhamdulillah, we're really grateful. We've got a beautiful community of people who we have an active WhatsApp where it's not an open chat. It's just that there is 40 minutes a week where we have an open chat and then we close the group or just announcements. So we're trying to also live the virtues we're trying to share through the story, inshallah. And the feedback has been good, alhamdulillah. We've spent a lot of time in, I think, testing and engaging with a diverse group of friends, advisors from different backgrounds, professional paths. Muhammad Faris, he, alhamdulillah, I think said it well. I appreciated how he, enjoyed the story, but he thought it was presenting, Islamic spirituality in a compelling fiction. So I think he alhamdulillah, he captured well what we were hoping to do, inshallah.
Yeah, I met Jorgen Ditterman on the bottom right hand there.
Yes.
In Qatar, Professor at Qatar there. He's a great scholar, good man.
Yeah. He's actually, mashallah, he's an extraordinary supporter. He read the early draft, pre-launch draft, and gave us wonderful comments and feedback, even reviewing early versions of the map, for example, with some great suggestions. So thank you, Matthias, for being a great supporter. And people like him, they, we one thing I think Rihanna and I are conscious of doing is how do we co-design? How do we think of what is our community? How can we be of service through this? We didn't set about going, how do we make a book that's going to spike and become popular and then turn into a TV show? It's like, how can we help address and create something that will resonate with people of different ages and walks of life, addressing Islamic spirituality in an accessible way and kind of inviting them into a deeper exploration, if this is an interface to something deeper, inshallah.
Okay.
And I think they're all the slides. We've got it. Appreciate your patience as we went through those.
Not at all. There we go. So yes, and this is the book got my own copy. We'll put links in the description below where you can access the audio book. You can get your own copy of this book and other links as well of interest. It's a very user-friendly book, full of illustrations, and I haven't finished it yet, but it's good reading so far. So thank you very much indeed, Peter and Rehan, for sharing your extraordinary work. I do wish it well and great success, inshallah. Do you have any final thoughts or words before we conclude?
Yeah, I think just that we're very, alhamdulillah, thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about the book. And I think one of the things that we're kind of mindful of is that the book, because people often ask, like, who should read it? What age is it accessible for? And I think, anyone like 12 plus is fine. And 12 plus mainly because some of the ideas are a bit more complicated for like very young children to understand. So 12 plus, obviously adults. And as you know, like any kind of great novel is written at sort of a couple of different levels. And I'm not saying this is a great novel, but great novels generally are written at a few levels. One is the literal level, which is the plot, right? So A happens, B happens, so on. And that's going to be a page turner and interesting and so on. And then there's and I think most people will get that. Then there's the kind of the allegorical level. It's like, what are the writers really saying? And, George Orwell, Animal Farm. Yes, it's a story about some animals taking over a farm, but it's about the Russian Revolution, right? And then, so for us, we're talking really about a couple of themes. One of those is about the loss of sacred knowledge and about, what does it mean to be human in today's world, really. And that's the kind of allegorical message. And then you've got the kind of the moral level of the novel, which is where you put the characters into dilemmas, and then you find out who they really are, right? Yeah. Because like all of us can be very, very happy and very honorable when things are going well, but when things get a little bit difficult, how do you behave? So there's that kind of the moral level and how the characters react in certain situations, and then at the deeper level of the novel, hopefully, is the spiritual level, which is really a question about how someone can get redemption, right? That's what we're looking at. That's like the deep spiritual meaning in the story, because if someone has made a mistake, right, you don't just write them off and you say, well, that's a bad guy, he's just a bad guy, let's ostracize him from the community. Well, maybe you need to give him a lifeline to come back, because God is forgiving. So, why can't we be forgiving as well? And that's also the message, really, if you read The Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky, which is the fact that, give people a second chance, right? Give people a second chance. And it's better to forgive than to punish. And so I think we're leaning into that kind of theme there in the story, within the whole arc of because it's going to be like 5-6 books, inshallah. So within the arc of the series, that's what we're leaning into, this issue of redemption, that it's never too late. Like, doesn't matter what you've done, who you are, it doesn't matter. The doors of Tawbah are always open. So that is, within the story, but it's very subtle, of course, and probably most people won't get it. but some people will get it. So we've tried to layer the story with some complexity there.
And I think beautifully around that beautifully is the importance of sahba, companionship. It's not an individual superhero story that's coming in with superpowers that can save us. It's about a group of people working together. They're on a spiritual journey individually, but collectively as a community, seeing the differences, the diversity. How do we work together? So there's definitely messages there. And even working with Rehan, collaborating on this, alhamdulillah, has been a great example, and our community really giving us good feedback and guidance, and yourself, Paul, and others, showing curiosity. So that's really a final request is, we welcome anyone to come and join the community. We'd love people to really explore it and help us along the journey that it is.
I mean, it's really nice. I mean, I in the past really enjoyed John Bunyan's Pilgrim's Progress, C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. We've spoken endlessly about Lord of the Rings by Tolkien, of course, and all of these are, incredible creations. They have their, the literal meaning. The drama Pilgrim's Progress is a guy who goes off on his own and so on. But there's a deeper meaning. There's a spiritual meaning. Yeah. It's about the Christian's journey through life and his struggles and the opposition he meets and so on. But this, what you produce, is an Islamic equivalent, I guess, where you can take it literally, you can take it morally, spiritually. It has a depth as well as a surface meaning, like these other texts we mentioned do as well. So it's nice that that in English that this is a new addition to that genre, that the Muslims and others, non-Muslims, can appreciate on different levels.
Yeah, inshallah. And I think, other novels I've written, The Tomb of Empires does the same thing. It's layered in that level. And the Tudor Turk series also, it's layered in that level. So I've kind of, taken a very deliberate approach. And what that means is that when you're doing the redraft, you're going back and rewriting the whole story, you have to look at the whole thing and look at the layering. It's like making a good biryani, right? Like you have to put the right layers in, and then you have to slow cook it.
You've lost me on the analogy, but I'm sure it makes sense to a lot of people.
It's like layering a great cake. Like layering a great cake. Yes, putting a lot of different layers on the cake.
Let it bake, you would always say. We would finish a piece and just let it bake. And I will share a fun fact. One of Rehan's extraordinary talents is he's a chai wizard. He has his own little unlabeled set of jars when he'll make, I don't know where he gathers quite these ingredients. He's almost like a character in this book, but I know he wouldn't be so difficult to do that. So that definitely helped the production of Khayal was Rehan's beautiful, unique signature chai.
Good. Okay. Well, on that note, thank you very much indeed, Peter and Rehan. I wish your book every success, inshallah. And as I say, folks, do look in the description below for links to the books and the audio and everything else, so you can continue this extraordinary adventure for yourself. So thank you both to the guests, and salam alaikum. Until next time.
Wa alaikum salam. Thanks, Paul.